Okay, I'm calling this special meeting of La Habra Heights City Council to order for January 10th, 2026. And Norm?
Here.
Greg? Here. John?
Here.
Carol? And I'm here. So please join me in the flag salute. Okay, I don't have any public speaker cards. This is a very open meeting, so we don't worry about filling out a card necessarily. So would anyone care to speak this morning? It's going to be a short meeting, hopefully. Okay, with that, we'll move into the administrative items. We're getting together today for strategic planning. It's a workshop. And we're going to be talking about the city structure a little bit and the history and our current needs and what's happened in the past and how we move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rafferty.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning, everybody. So we've held a series of these strategic planning workshops to kind of look at the way and how the city spends money and budgets and trying to place some priorities on things. So we have already had a meeting workshop related to roads, the fire department, and law enforcement services, and this one is about city administration, so city offices and how we run. And then next month we will have one sort of capstone meeting that will kind of work to incorporate all of those things into one group, so we can kind of look at all the parts and pieces of the city, how we function, how we operate, where our priorities should be, and the best way that we should be spending our city dollars and funds, and ways to look at potentially increasing some of those funding sources to make sure we can be adequately staffed and operationally ready to respond in case of emergency or other events. But this one is city administration. So we'll move in. We have a PowerPoint there, so we'll move into a PowerPoint, and I'll kind of run through the slides and get the lights so everybody can see. So like I said, this one is related to administration. So kind of our purpose of what we're here for, if you can go to the next one there, is yes. Or sorry, back to the other one. Yeah, one more. No. There. So we're just looking at our current operating environment, our capacities, our gaps, our regulatory pressures, and things that happen at a citywide level that come from things in the community that needs and are being met to the community. Also, the pressures that get placed on the city by the state and federal government as passing of new laws and regulations that we have to respond and then implement as well. So we kind of have all of these different pressures at all different areas from local to federal government that we have to be able to meet and comply with all the way through. Also trying to identify some critical services, our staffing needs, what is the best staffing level that we should be having for the city to make sure that we have adequate staff to be able to keep the city running, be able to respond to pressures that may need additional work, and when we do have emergencies, we have adequate staffing to be able to respond to those emergencies. And then also evaluate some of our funding sources and looking at where our general fund revenues come from and where some of the grants that we received and also restricted funds that come from a state and a federal level are ever changing, especially in this current climate right now. So we'll kind of jump into some of the pressures of City Hall. So this one right now, like we kind of said, regulatory expansion. So we see a lot of increasing, the state is ever changing laws and adding new laws. Obviously, with the beginning of the year, there's lots of things that come into place typically in January and July that we have to meet with. There are new Brown Act requirements that we are in the process of making sure that we meet everything we need to meet as far as being able to have meetings and adequate way to do all of those. There's some changes that are happening to that right now and also in the future in July related to how we operate our meetings and how we run meetings and the way the agendas and things look. So lots of things that continue to change from a state and a federal level. Service, so also like the service demand, so that's the increase. So when you look at the amount of inspections that are needed, so building inspections that go out there, code enforcement inspections that are needed, brush clearance as we move through the brush season, and the demand on fire department and our brush inspectors to go out and do those inspections, the projects that come in through planning, also the projects that council have, other projects that have been in the pipeline for a while that need to get done, being able to keep up with that demand for the projects and the backlogs that we have. We've been trying to work through some of those backlogs and close out some projects. We're nearing a few of them here pretty quickly related to like the traffic signal and striping and guardrails and a ramp an ADA ramp for some additional ADA spaces at the park and other planning type related things from state pressures from there. Also, another thing that happens that we deal with a lot on the like administrative side, there are a lot of like reports that we have to do, especially year end. We have to do reports to all the various agencies that we receive funding from, so like MTA, state, Caltrans, federal government, our CDBG, our block grants. There's also our insurance company, CJPIA, also has a bunch of reporting that we have to do that happens throughout the year, more condensed here towards the end of the year. So you'll typically see like Angie and myself spending a lot of time trying to get annual reports out and numbers and things to these various agencies that either provide funding sources for the city or our insurance carrier, and looking at how we have done over the years and where our premiums will be for the following years for those. So there's lots of always constant reporting deadlines that come up and are out there. Administration overload, so we have to also look at our staff time. So we do have a lot of meetings. So last year we had 55 council committee meetings out there. We did a series of workshops for Firewise. We held a few CERT meetings. We do, obviously coming up next weekend, we do quarterly cleanups. So next weekend will be quarterly cleanup, and at the same time we also do a Hacienda Road cleanup as well. So we do those 4 times a year. We have a hazardous waste event that we put on in conjunction with the county, and a mulch event for the trash company for people to be able to receive some free mulch if they're looking for those. This year we also did a special one for the fire department related to the fire engine. So we put together a nice ceremony for the new engine, and thanked Senator Archuleta for his support and finances for us to be able to acquire that new fire engine and be able to place it into service and provide that long-term goal for the city to be able to respond to emergencies and not have to worry about that piece of equipment, which is a very vital piece of equipment for those. So lots of things. There's lots of like hidden time that go into like agendas and things like that. People, you typically will see the agendas pop out. You'll see the staff reports that go along with them, but there's a lot of staff time that goes along on the back end of those to be able to research, write, prepare reports, prepare exhibits, put it all together in an agenda and get it posted in the various forms we have to do, and then be able to come to a meeting and present that information and make it through there. So we have a council meeting in this upcoming Monday. So it's not a very lengthy agenda. It's a relatively short agenda for what we typically see. And we probably have a good 80 hours into just that one agenda when you look at the various parts and pieces that have to go into it from all the different staff members. So about 80 hours into that agenda. So there's lots of time there that go into processing all those things and being able to put it out. Another thing we've been looking at too is staffing capacity, and that we've seen some changing to the way our staff has been over the years. We have lost a few positions as we've gone along, and we'll have another slide a little bit later on that talks a little more about staffing levels and what staffing used to be back in the day versus what we do currently as far as staffing. And the other one is really like emergency readiness, so being able to respond. There's those things when we do have an emergency and there's something that's needed. Typically, we have to move into an all hands on deck type of situation. So when we have either major wind events or fire that would break out in the community, or as we saw with the rainstorm back in 2024, basically all of the city function had to move into helping to assist with that emergency. So everything else that we would normally be doing on a daily basis just kind of ground to a halt so everybody could jump in and take care of the emergency that was on hand. So being able to prepare for all those things and looking at as the seasons change, our emergency and our threat risks change. Because we're in the summertime and we move into fire season, it's always that, it's fire, but we also move into Santa Ana season, which is trees and trees falling down and other potential things that can come up from the winds. We move into the wintertime, we get into the rainy season, and we've obviously had some flooding and some risks in the past that we need to then be prepared for. So we have to move staffing into different modes to take care of different operations to make sure we're ready for an emergency, not only just fire department wise, but also city staff wise and public works as well. So those are some of the pressures that we have on City Hall right now. Next, we'll move and talk a little bit about staffing levels. So we kind of took a look back. Obviously, I started with the city in 2016, so I'm rolling up on 10 years here pretty quick with the city, and obviously I've seen some changes to the staffing levels when I've been here. But we're very fortunate that we've have a couple of long-term employees. So Grace and Angie are currently our two longest-term employees, and have been here for a while and really seen the staffing changes over the years. So if you look at what we have right now, so current roles we have is city manager, assistant city manager, admin assistant, finance manager, account tech, permit technician, code enforcement and brush clearance officer, maintenance worker, and public works specialist. Those are all of our full-time employees. So that would be myself, Angie, admin assistant is Christina over there working the boards. Our finance manager is one that we are hiring for at the moment. Accounting technician is Jesse, Angie's counterpart in finance. The permit technician is Alan, who's actually working the cameras for us today. Code enforcement and brush clearance is Kevin, who splits his time between code enforcement and brush inspections. We sort of split him 50-50 to cost share between fire department and community development on that one. Maintenance worker right now is Aaron, and public works specialist is Grace. Those are all of our full-time employees that we currently have. Part-time management intern is Josh. So if you've seen the website, the Guac Talks, this presentation right now, those are a lot of the handiwork that Josh has. He's been updating our flyers and other communication things that we go out, and helps us with other like administrative tasks and special projects. We have a code enforcement officer part-time, which is David. I'm sure most of you have probably met David. He's done a couple of stints here. He started with us back in I think 2017 timeframe. It worked a couple of years, left, and then we needed some help with code enforcement again, and he came back. He also works a full-time job at another jurisdiction. So he already has a 40-hour-a-week job that he works for another city as a code enforcement officer, and then he comes in and works part-time with us for that. And then building inspector is our part-time employee, other part-time employee we have right now, who is Michael. I'm sure everybody in this room has probably had Michael over to their house once or twice for an inspection. If you've ever pulled a building permit since about 2015, you've probably met Michael. He's our building inspector. He's a part-time inspector, so he's typically here in the morning, so office hours 8 to 9, out does inspections. Once he's done with inspections, he'll typically come back, do paperwork, and then leave. So he's usually out of the office by noon, 1 o'clock, just depending on the schedule he has. We do have contracted, so we do use some contracted employees for different aspects of things. So planning right now, we currently have a planner is contracted out. Engineering, we do contract out our engineering services, so city engineer, any design engineering services we have, plan checking of planning and building plans. Even our encroachment permits are reviewed by engineering tech. And then we also have a consultant for building, so building official services. So Scott is our building official services and helps us with our code updates, anything technical that needs to be looked at or done building wise, he makes final decision on. They also provide our plan checking services for the building department. From there, we do use another company for fire department plan checking. Same thing they look at the development plans, review and approve those, and then they do the inspection services for fire sprinklers, fire alarms, and our fuel modification for private residences. They've also assisted us in the past with facility inspections, so like care facilities, schools, churches, commercial businesses are supposed to have annual inspections. They have assisted us with that. When we don't have a fire department staff member who has that skill and knowledge, they will step in and help us with that. And then also, probably everybody who's talked and called in the City Hall has met our community development aide. Currently, right now, a contracted employee for community development. So that's our current staff that we have right now: 9 full-time, 3 part-time, 4 contracted staff members. But if we go back to into the 2010s, there was about 15 full-time people, 2 part-time people, and so 15 full-time people, 2 part-time, and then 4 to 5 contracted staff members. I don't know, Angie and Grace had kind of gone through and went back through all the various employees that we've had in the past and parts and pieces. So, a lot of the different departments had multiple people that filled that one. As we kind of look at now, we sort of have single function where people really fall into like a single function category. So everybody is kind of held on knowledge base in one person, which is good that somebody has extensive knowledge on something, but also if you lose that employee takes a huge bit of knowledge base with them, and the next person that comes on board has to spend more time changing, learning, trying to figure out what it was, how we'd done things in the past. So obviously being able to have multiple employees in multiple departments helps with those things of people coming and going and changing of positions and transitions of people coming and leaving the city, because you have somebody else there that's able to transfer those knowledges. So like when I started in community development, so when I originally started with the city to be the principal planner, I walked in, there was a contract planner who had filled that position for a couple of months before I started. I spent half a day with her, but quickly learned that she was just like moving things along and didn't look at any of the comments and wasn't really looking at any of the projects. I had to kind of step in and learn from ground zero to figure out what was done in the past. And there, I relied on Nicole. Many of you have been here for a while, know Nicole. Like, she had been in the department for a while, had some of that knowledge, so I was able to ask her, okay, what have you seen? This been done this way in the past, or has it been done this way in the past? Which really helps us kind of move things along. So as we can kind of see in the past, we used to have multiple people that filled multiple positions in departments. Now we're sort of down into like single silos of things. Anything you want to add to that one, Angie? Or?
No, just when people have left, instead of filling that position, we would kind of hand the work off to other employees. So when I started back in, I think I started in 2008, 8 or 9, I don't remember. We had about full staff. Those positions, some of them don't even exist because they've created new positions and the work has just been moved around. But now we just don't even have that. So imagine, like, I'm probably wearing about 5 hats. In my department, well, in finance, usually cities have a full team. Here, it's a 2-person job. So, yeah, it's just, we do a lot here, and I really don't think the public realizes how much we do, because we don't complain. We get the work done. We know it's part of our job, and we know we have an option. We could work here or go find another job. But I mean, I personally love this city. I'm here because I really care about the city, and I don't know, I couldn't imagine being somewhere else. Just the community's great, staff's great, council's great. So for myself, it just makes it easier to stay here, but we do a lot. And compared back in the day, we do a lot more now, but unfortunately we don't have the staff, and I think we're very considerate here, and we're always trying to find ways to cut back, to save, save what we can, so that way we can operate without really hurting. So that's it.
Move on to the next one. We'll kind of give you a quick snapshot. So this is sort of like a week in the life of me, kind of. So core administration, that's going to be like just city operations. That's going to be people asking me questions, need decisions being made. Hey, we need to make a decision. This project needs to go out. This needs to go here. These are different things that need to happen, and those things are stuff that just kind of flows through the door. Those are people showing up at my desk saying, hey, I got a question. We got to go here. We got to make a decision on this. Can I go fix that? That's 25 to 30 hours a week, typically just in that. Then you move into like community relations. So that's kind of me being accessible to the public, me being able to meet with the public, go to the counter, take a phone call, meet somebody out in the field. On average, I spend probably about 10 hours a week just doing that. Random walk up to the counter to say hi. Monica was here for a minute in the back there. She does a lot with the Improvement Association and the Historical Committee and other things, and she'll pop in and I'll be able to go up and say hi, how's it going? What are you working on here? What do you need help with? And be able to have those communications with that. Then about 7 to 10 hours a week, so interdepartmental council coordination. That's going to be meeting with council members. So I typically have some scheduled meetings weekly with some council members. Other council members, we typically will touch base at the end of the week and kind of go over any questions or concerns that are out there, or anything they may be interested in working on and moving in a different way to it. One that's harder and harder is like field and inspection work. So that's actually being able to get out of the office and go out in the community to see what's going on out there. That may be needing to meet somebody at a property, but also go out and check to make sure that the new signal is functioning properly, or if we're having an issue over here and we're consistently hearing that the East Road traffic signal is having a hard time for people getting off of East Road, being able to go out and take a look firsthand to see what's going on. Kind of 2 to 5 hours a week, I typically go for that. Emergency preparedness, weather response, so that's kind of what we were talking about, being able to transition and adjust. That's the one that really varies with depending on what's going on. So we moved through the holiday season. There was a pretty significant storm system that rolled through, so there was a lot of work that was done before the holidays to put things into place, touch base with contractors, get things cleaned up and get cleared, make sure we have sand and sandbags, and the fire department is staffed and has the ability to do what they need, or if they need any other equipment or work or additional resources, we can have those ready. But then we also have to interconnect with our other agencies around us. So that's talking with our ARAE, our DMAC, our disaster organization. That's our also coordination with County EOS, who's open, so or the EOC, being able to communicate what's going on here in the Heights and let them know if we're having an issue, if we're good, if we're open, we're okay. So all those things kind of go on. They vary depending on what the storm is coming through and what the season. So it can be no time if it's just a nice, comfortable springtime. There's no major issues or problems, or we could spend a significant amount of time, but typically about 2 hours a week at the most on that, on average for those. But so those sort of like a quick little snapshot of that. A lot of my day is spent either in meetings or trying to catch up on projects, making sure there are things that are moving, because ultimately, if I'm not here to be able to assist staff with things, then projects will hit a roadblock and they can't move forward. So I have to make myself available and open to be able to keep other things running, all the other departments going, and making sure they have what they need. We were kind of totaling stuff from last year. So last year I had 632 scheduled meetings. So that's planned, scheduled on the calendar, meeting to either meet with residents, other jurisdictions, organizations, community groups, or committees that we sat down. And so I scheduled out 632 of those last year. And that's not including just the brief interactions that we have as people come and go and see them at that. A lot of times Monica's here, so I'll use Monica. I see Monica all the time. Bruce Thomas also, we'll catch Bruce Thomas here and there. He also is nice and lets us know if he sees a problem or an issue out there. He'll relay that information to us. So that's kind of a little snapshot of that. I'm generally in the office about 50 hours a week minimum. I probably work a good 50 to 60 hours a week typically on an average week. And then we'll move on to the next one. Angie's going to give you a little snapshot of Angie.
Well, for me right now, I have all the reports that are due, the state, CJPIA. These are just annual reports that are due, AQMD, from different agencies we receive funding from, or they use this information to calculate how much money we should be receiving, or they use it to bill us. Also, we also see DBG, and then we have the daily stuff that needs to get done, daily operations. So I'm just kind of all over the place, and I help staff out a lot, like at the counter or with phone calls. So my week is different every week. My day's different every day. So it just kind of depends what I have going on. So I'm pretty much finished with all the annual reports. I just have 2 more that I have to submit. But right now I'm in the process of entering all the paramedic membership program grants into CDBG, which that takes time. So I'll usually do that stuff from home just because I don't have any interruptions, and it's easier for me to just concentrate and knock out. Also IT, we have IT problems, and we outsource, so we don't physically have an IT person here. So normally I'll try to take care of the issue, otherwise we call them out. And I still have to get involved because whatever we need, I need to make sure we have the funding for it and make sure it gets approved ahead of time. So my normal work week is probably also between 50 to 60 hours a week. Once we get closer to the budget, I don't have a day off. I'm just working on the budget, just trying to make sure I capture everything. I just try to be super accurate. That's it.
So the other part that we kind of deal with or talk a little more about is just our funding sources and our revenue. So obviously, we're a little more unique community. We're pretty much purely residential. So a lot of other cities will have sales tax and other tax bases that are be able to help provide assistance for revenue and the budget. For us, our primary source is property taxes. And we have for a long time used like state and federal grants to offset costs for certain things and equipment. We did a lot of it for fire department. Fire department uses a lot of state and federal grants, but those times have kind of changed here a little more recently. So we have definitely seen like state and federal grants drop off. We have a couple of grants that we have submitted for about 1.5 years that just haven't moved forward in the process. They're just sort of frozen. We received a community grant from Congresswoman, and it will probably never be appropriated, so we will never see the funding for that particular project. So we've just sort of seen a very different climate as far as like federal and state grants. Obviously, the governor just released the budget, and the state is at a little over $2 billion deficit as well. So those things are changing rapidly and a little bit differently, which affects us as well, because we won't be able to have those things. And then we look at our limited revenue. It's mostly from property taxes, permits, and fees. Those are fairly consistent. They're flat. They don't rise exponentially. We've seen quite a bit of inflation over the last several years. Those don't rise exponentially with that rate of inflation as well. So our revenue streams are very flat, and we have a very narrow pool that we pull from. When we talk about property taxes, when community residents pay property taxes, we only receive a small share of that property tax. So there's a whole laundry list of other organizations and jurisdictions that receive a portion of those property tax dollars. So it's not all that money flows into the city. It goes to lots of different county and school districts and community, college boards, water districts, sanitation districts, and other organizations receive a portion of every dollar that residents pay in property taxes. So we see about 10 cents on the dollar is what comes into the city. So that's about our share as far as like property tax wise. So those things, we don't have a lot of houses turnover, so there's not a lot of sales of houses here year over year. So it's it's a fairly consistent rise when it rises, but it doesn't grow exponentially as we've seen the cost of services that we have to provide grow exponentially over the last several years. And kind of coming out of COVID, we've already seen that cost of everything has increased pretty significantly. Our revenue streams haven't increased that exponentially as well. So a very narrow funding and revenue sources that we have currently, and looking at overall, like, the flexibility has narrowed to how we can spend those. We do receive restricted monies from state and feds. Even those have started to shrink. A lot of road funding comes from the taxes you pay on gasoline. A lot of people are moving to electric vehicles or more fuel-efficient vehicles, so those tax dollars from the sale of gasoline are going down. So some of those funding sources that we use for critical things like roads are actually decreasing year over year as vehicles become more fuel efficient and people move to electric vehicles and aren't purchasing gas anymore. So there's lots of other things that factor into, like, our shrinking revenues, and not just grants and those things, but those other revenue sources at a state and a federal level are starting to dip down because the way people live their lives and how we operate is a little different today than it's been in the past. So being able to try to figure out a way to have some flexibility with how we operate and how we spend those dollars and earn that revenue is something we would definitely need to consider as a city. So we'll move to the next one there. There we go. So kind of path forward, some things for us to look at is alternative funding sources. So looking at ways to be able to provide some support for city services in the community without necessarily just a reliance solely on grants or other things, because they're not as consistent, but finding a way to be able to find other funding sources that are out there and a way to be able to keep the city moving forward at the pace we would like to move it forward, and be able to respond and operate with the budget needed for staffing, for being able to make improvements to all of the facilities and the things that the residents enjoy here in the community. Operational and improvements and efficiencies. So these are some of the other things we can look at, as well as far as like technological things, to be able to move more into a paperless process and moving us away from more hard paper everything into more digital, which will be a different way of needing to be able to spend our dollars, not only just in additional services as far as like online, like we use CitizenServe for permits and Tyler for a portion of the finance, and First Due for fire department. There are other systems and services that we would need, but it's also the back end IT side of that would be needed to be bolstered for us to be able to move that way. But moving that way would maybe make us a little more efficient in the way we process and handle projects and things. And then the last is sort of, staffing capacity and well-billing, making sure that we have adequate staff to be able to do the work that we have on hand, prevent burnout from employees overworking our staff. We ask a lot of staff. I ask a lot of staff. Obviously, we've held 72 events this past year, and we've had staff at every single one of those events. And those are typically after hours or on weekends that I ask our staff to come in and help and assist. Some of those people are happy to do it because they get a little bit of overtime for it. Other staff members are salaried, and that's just part of our job duties here, to be able to come in and provide those services for the community. We don't want to get to a point where we burn everybody out, and also be able to just keep things flowing. If we have a good, productive staff, our workload and our service should improve as well there. So those are some ideas for us to consider as we move through this process and talk a little more about city administration and operations for that. And that's all I have for the PowerPoint. We'll move into the other part of it. So I'll get the lights back on in the room. We can have a discussion.
Well, thank you for that presentation. That was very informative. We do have some public here, and this is a workshop, so it's open. So after hearing the presentation, does anybody have any questions, or before we get into our discussion? I would like to hear from the public if they have any questions at all regarding this. Feel free to come up. You don't need a speaker card or anything.
Oh, thank you. She was saying I was under tall for this. Thank you very much. One question I have is for your accounting, what do you use, what is your system that you're using?
It's called Encode version 10. It's through Tyler Technologies.
Okay. What I'm hearing is that we are way behind on our technology, and looking at the hours. I used to work in a lab where I did hours like that. You're going to have burnout if we don't do something. And the one thing I'm thinking is you have a lot of seniors in this city who have skill sets. And I'm wondering if there's a way that you can somehow, of course it requires some training for them, using them as volunteers, or you can even do minimum wage if you want to do something like that. Because seniors, a lot of seniors that I know want to be feeling like they're part of the community, and they'd like to contribute. And I know in this city there's a big heart. I mean, this city was created by volunteers. You're all volunteers up here. You're here because of the goodness of your heart and your belief in the city, and so I'm just thinking that's like one source that you could do that. When it comes to grants, yeah, that is kind of, I lived in a grant-based environment most of my life as a scientist, and that is tough. So I'm going to actually do some research on ideas of where we can get more funding. And I know there are some ideas that are out there. We do have a lot of people who, I'd have no problems approaching people, asking them, hey, could you help out with the city? Because we do have a lot of people who are well endowed for their future that may want to give up a few tax write-offs towards the city, if there's some way you can do that. Anyways, those are my thoughts.
Well, thank you, Kathy.
And thank you to the staff, by the way, because I know that it is very hard, and all the hours that you put in, you are appreciated. We do realize that out here in the public.
John wants to speak.
John Dominguez, Avocado Crest. So my basic themes always the same: volunteers, and how can we use the volunteers that we have, and that's what Kathy started talking about, and that's what I wanted to mention too. When it was mentioned that we may need that data entry is a problem too, as far as doing that from home. There are many people that I know of already that would be willing to volunteer for many of these things. But there's always has been a little bit of a resistance of, I think, staff accepting volunteers. I know it could be a problem. There's training, there's trust. Those two things, I can see how it's an obstacle. But I think also, if we do accept this notion of having volunteers do some of this critical work, that all it really requires is key punching to enter information into the system. If you folks can come up with some kind of a disclosure agreement to keep things private, just to volunteer. I'd be willing to volunteer without any pay. That's fine. And if you feel more comfortable with some kind of an agreement on my part for me to sign to be liable if I start blabbing about numbers and figures and names, then yes, I'll be liable for that. And I wouldn't do that. But I'm just saying that's some kind of protection for yourselves. And if you want to consider volunteers to do some of this critical stuff that all really is just manual work or mental work that doesn't really require much intelligence. It's just punch in the number. I've done a lot of that stuff. Counter help, again, same thing. I know how to say, he's not here, I can take a message, or things like that. So I think there's many opportunities that are out there. Right now, the online volunteer form that we have on the city website has captured 13 volunteers. We've got 13 people waiting for instructions. That's not including myself, so that's 14. So some of these folks, one did specifically mention she's interested in data entry, helping with data entry. One person has already helped me to redo the video for the instructional video for the Hacienda Road cleanup. So that's something that went off my hands. Somebody else was doing that. Somebody else was interested in Firewatch. So yes, there's stuff coming in from the website, from the volunteer form, that my worry is that if we keep them waiting too long for suggestions as far as how they can help, they're going to lose interest. I'm going to lose interest. If things don't move in time, then yeah, I think it would be up to somebody else to follow up. And that's what I'm worried about with them, is that they're not going to be interested if it takes too long for us to get back to them saying, here's what we can do. So yeah, I think my main point here is that we need to use volunteers who are coming online. We need to figure out how to do that. I know it's kind of new, and we can use these situations that the volunteers are suggesting to be interested in participating in as a way to start establishing methodologies and how to deal with that situation with these groups, do whatever function you want them to do. I know I've been asked in the past to figure out everything from A to Z. How is everything going to work from all the groups doing all these things all at the same time? I can't do that. It's got to be, this elephant can only be cooked a little bit at a time, and they're offering that opportunities. People are stepping up, and we need feedback as far as how we can do it. Right now, my latest project is working on the drain, mapping the drains, which has been a function of volunteers working together. Stephen Blagden has helped with a lot of information. It's coming together, and hopefully that's going to establish a certain sort of institutional database, because there's already two in the program that I'm working with, which is a very functional, useful, popular program that is, believe it or not, it's a free program, but it's the free version of what the government and every other major organization uses when it comes to geographical information, when mapping, roads, and anything that has to do with plotting something on a piece of paper. That's what they're using. They're using a different version, which is at least $1,000 to $2,000 per year to rent. This is free. Anyways, so what I have on there right now is one layer, which is the evacuation routes. The next layer I'm working on right now is the drainage routes. The next layer after that would be before the 4th of July, which will be the mapping of the city for the fire watch people. So all this stuff can be put aside. One day I'll move on from one form or another from the community, but the information stays behind. And that's the point of this whole, I think, meeting, is for the information that people are gathering as they're working here to stay behind in a form that is not going to be a piece of paper and people are going to forget where that piece of paper is at or doesn't exist anymore. The last thing I got to say is one of the biggest disappointments was when I got the information for the drainage locations in La Habra Heights that we have now. About half of the information is missing, and there's no software, nothing. There was a lot of money paid for this information back in 2012, but we have nothing but pieces of paper, and that's all we have. And we need to have more than just pieces of paper. We need to have a record that can be updated and be dynamic, and that's the whole thing that I'm working with right now. As far as the drainage situations, you can make notes, you can change things, you can add, you can make corrections. It's dynamic. It's not a piece of paper that was printed out years ago saying that drain needs to be fixed. That was 10 years ago. And that piece of paper, what it shows in that piece of paper might as well be an Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's not relevant to today anymore. So use the volunteers, figure out a way. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Does anybody else want to comment or speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council for discussion. Who wants to comment first? Greg wants to.
Greg wants to, yeah. So I was just looking that our population back in 2010, in the census in 2010, was 5,325 people, and in 2020 it was 5,382. So the number of people in the city hasn't really changed dramatically. But what has changed dramatically is the number of residences in the city. So they've gone up by a considerable number. I still don't have an exact number, but it's clear that we've done considerable building in the ensuing 15 years from the 2010 census. I did another quick little look. If our current number of houses is estimated to be, or a number of people, houses rather, is estimated to be Yeah, let's not do that. When I ran the numbers for the taxation, we should talk a little bit about that, because revenue is a big issue here. If we had more revenue, we wouldn't have half the problems we have today, right? So probably 80% of the problems. So one of the challenges is if every house in the city, we get 0.014% of the real estate taxes collected from the houses in the city. The average house in the city, somewhere around between $1.1 million and $1.4 million seems to be what shows up in the public record. And so you can easily figure out if the tax rate for those houses is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion. And we bring in, I think we're estimating for this cycle here, $22,570,000. That's our whole budget for that. The second issue, it's really obvious from the numbers that we've dropped anywhere from, in 2010, our staffing level was 21 to 22. Today, our staffing level is 16. So we're down 5 or 6 people. Those jobs didn't disappear. In fact, they got worse, right? They got harder. This year, I've had, and you look at city manager's time, he's underestimating, but anywhere from 44 to 57 hours a week. I'm sure he's lots more than that. I mean, it's hard to ask someone to not downplay how much they're working. Angie, 60 hours. Clearly, I think it's probably more than 60 hours. We're going to burn these kids out. You know, that's just obvious. Then the challenge is because now we're using we only have 9 full-time people, where we had 15 back in 2010. If part-time people are wonderful because they can do some of the work, but the challenge with part-time people is, in my judgment, they're not here forever, and they can't be cross-trained because this isn't a career for them. They're part-time people. They come in. We're like many cities of our size, and even much larger than we hire out all the professional services that we require in the city. And so that's just market rate. Whatever we can get those contracts for, we get them for. But we're pretty static. We're going to be stuck with doing that because we certainly can't afford to hire a city engineer. These people are skilled people with advanced degrees, and they cost more money than we could ever afford. The other problem that is mentioned here, except peripherally, is that I've met with Rafferty every week for all of 2025. We spend 2 hours together every Thursday. That's part me trying to learn about the city, try to understand what the issues are, and that sort of resulted in us starting these sustainability workshops. But again, I'm eating up at least 2 hours of his day, once a week, every week, to help me. But the other thing about it is everyone on the city council has our things that we're working on. And so we're not just sitting up here once a month and listening to things. We all get out there and work, and that requires us to abuse staff. Right? And I don't mean that, I mean that in the kindest possible way. We have to take up their time. One of the things that we've talked about before about staff is that Rafferty gets a bum rap for not responding to emails. Well, he doesn't respond to my emails. Why? He doesn't have time to respond to emails. But he's kind enough, if somebody wants to walk up to the front desk, he'll go out there and talk to them. He knows he has to, and he wants to, because he wants to hear what people are saying. But that chews up time, too. And, this is an interesting city, because we're all pretty individual in this city, I'd say. We all have our own issues and thoughts. But it's pretty clear that we have to get our staff levels at least back to the 2010 level. Probably should be greater because the responsibilities that the city has from regulation and statute have grown dramatically in the last 15 years. Now, none of the legislators do nothing more in California than pass new laws. At least 50% of those laws have some impact directly on the municipalities in the state. There are cities of 3 times our size that actually have people assigned to governmental affairs. We have to rely upon the fact that we get some of this information luckily, but we don't have anybody to scrub for it. So we're all constantly, Carol and I, when I came into office, and Carol and I were working on that HCD thing, and the one thing we talked about a lot was, geez, how do you catch all this stuff and do it right, and make sure you do it right so you don't get in trouble? How do you, so I think that's, even the 2010 staffing levels are not great, but they'd suffice, we believe, for going. The other obvious issue is anybody that reads the newspaper or watches news knows that the Trump administration is cutting back everything they can from the state of California. Yesterday, they took $160 million away from Caltrans. We get money from Caltrans because of public highways. Caltrans will suffer. We're not going to be able to say, oh, that's always going to be there. We're not, community development block grants. You know, that's been the salvation for most cities, and the federal administration doesn't like them, and they really don't like California. So as a consequence, we can't rely upon grants. I would guess, based upon my study in the last year, that at least 25% of our revenue came from grants. If you get lucky, and we got lucky with the fire engine, right? So Senator Archuleta was able to scrounge up $1 million for the fire engine. We could have never done that. We don't, you know, it's not right. So the obvious answer here is that if we don't increase our revenue in some fashion, we're going to burn out the people that are running this city, and we're going to miss a lot of opportunities. So it's clear to me that we have to make adjustments. In the earlier workshops, we've learned that when we did the roads assessment and when we did the fire assessment, we dramatically underestimated the costs. So as we learned in those two sessions, we're taking money out of our revenues from real estate tax in the general fund and supplementing the fire departments and the roads to the tune of a little over $2 million. So clearly this is exactly the problem. This is simple. It was always hardest for us to try to figure out how do we explain to people what's going on administratively. How do people know that our people are working hard? Well, I've talked to Rafferty, I've talked to Angie, I've talked to Grace at home, on the road, and they're always there. And if there's a problem in the city, our professional staff come here, and they don't care whether it's their 80th hour this week or this month. They don't care. They just come. So I think this is a good presentation. I think it explains things very, very well. And it would not be that much more expensive for us to eliminate the two assessment taxes and do a general tax that covers us and put in a cost allocator that keeps us current with inflation. So to me, I've always sort of figured that's where we'd have to end up. And when we come back together again in February, our challenge, what we'll try to do is summarize what we've learned from each of our sessions about the lack of revenue and the need for revenue, and summarize what we think is probably the only rational way of getting sufficient revenue to keep the city running comfortably. And that leaves one thing out, and that's the fire department's inability, and in fact the city's inability, to recapitalize their equipment. So over the holidays, we created the La Habra Heights Community Foundation, which is a 501(c)(3) corporation. The concept behind that is to have an organization that our residents, or anyone else for that matter, can contribute to and receive a tax deduction. Or if they use qualified charitable donations, they'll receive, it'll come off the top of their income. So we're hoping, Stan Carroll has agreed. Stan was mayor 4 times, I think. He served a long time. He's agreed to chair that board of directors. Roy Francis, you know, basically started in the fire department here after leaving Pasadena. Roy has agreed to be on that, and we believe that probably Fred Klein will be the 3rd member, just a 3-man board of directors. Then they'll supervise volunteers, to John's point, who will help us talk to friends and neighbors and encourage people to donate money through the foundation. Now, why do we want to do that? Well, must tell you, I was really embarrassed when my name was mentioned when I donated some money to the fire department. That's not the kind of thing I like to say. So, but if you're a municipality, you have to receive and accept the donation, and you have to do it publicly. So I'm sure there are people in the city that haven't given publicly because they're troubled by the idea that it'll be out there in the public, and someone else, or people will just be embarrassed that maybe somebody else in their neighborhood gave more than they did. So at the end of the day, this will help a little bit, but it's going to have to be dedicated towards capitalization. I mean, the dormitories are in trouble. You know, come July of this year, all of the yellow turnouts for the fire department go bad. They'll no longer be allowable. So and each of them costs $5,500 a piece. So that's the idea behind the foundation: capital assets. The operating expenses of having to have 2 empty EMTs, all those things, they have to be borne by the general city budget. And I'm hoping that we were always hoping, all of us have been hoping that by putting all this out in the open, everybody would be amenable to us changing around the taxation for this city. And my numbers are not certainly we'll have them closer when we get to February's meeting, but doing my own home, what I'm currently paying for the assessments, and what I would be paying if we close the gap based upon what these have shown for everything but non-capital items, it would cost me an extra $1,000, $1,400 a year, which is nothing to me. So I'm hoping it won't hurt. The other thing I should mention, if we do end up deciding to put on the ballot for next November a tax, that there is now an opportunity for those people who meet certain income characteristics, in other words, very low income people. I think of them as the widows and widowers that are living out their life on Social Security. There's a way now to exempt them from these taxes so they don't get hurt in the process. The county's been doing that now for 2 years in their measures, and it seems to be very successful. So that's my take.
Thank you, Greg. Rest of the council have any comments, or? Go ahead, John.
So, couple things. I think we need to, Rafferty, going into the next meeting, make sure that we take the public input into what's important. I think that's really critical because we've heard over the past 4 workshops now, this is the 4th, I believe, we've heard certain priorities from residents about what's important and what they would like to see happen within the city. I would also suggest that we look into a survey about, because not everyone can make these meetings, but I think it would be helpful to have a survey about what services are important to people. I know Greg mentioned the general fund supplementing the fire department. Have we verified that? Because I know there was some discussion during the fire department that maybe wasn't the case, that the fire department was somewhat fully funded. So I think we need to make sure we get some real hard numbers around the money going back and forth there. We're already in January. If we are thinking that we want to put something on a November ballot, we should have a very clear time frame for that, because I think we might already be behind if we wanted to get something on the November ballot, so we should probably understand what that time frame looks like. And then, as far as staffing goes, I know we tend to, as a council, not only are we worried about the immediate cost, but any staffing position changes we make, we should also understand the PERS, the retirement obligation that it encumbers the city with forever. So that's another concern that I have with adding staff. To get to John's comments on volunteers, maybe the first volunteer we should look for is a volunteer coordinator. John, I hear you that there's a lot of people that want to do things, but doing those things, there's an obligation. Then it creates an obligation, and while I'm a volunteer, I volunteer for a lot of different organizations. I volunteer here. It's sometimes without having someone running point and making sure that the needs are filled consistently, it gets hard for staff, because then it just chews up staff time to do that. So we probably should look for someone that's willing to, if we are considering having volunteers come in and work what I'll call the regular positions, answering phones or helping with paperwork or helping with filing or helping with the planning department. Those positions should be very well defined. The expectation should be written out, the scope and role should be written out, and then we should have someone that helps coordinate that work, so it's not a staffer that's doing it. So, but I'd like really for next meeting, as we, I think, have some tough decisions to make, understand, some of the costs that are associated with some of the things that we want to do in the city. I've heard that, code enforcement is important. I've heard that illegal construction issues are important. I was just looking at my notes from the fire meeting. We had everything from disband, only have paramedics in the city, disband the rest of the fire department, to, we need to hire full-time paramedics. So I think there's some work the fire department needs to do for the next meeting to come with their proposals. I know that we were fortunate this year, we got a lot of rain, so we don't have the same wildfire issue that we had last year, but we're fortunate. It's not an issue. So I am still very concerned about our ability to determine the safety of the city from an environmental perspective, mostly, the brush clearance, the fuels in the city. I think that's an area that's been neglected. I know that Chief Jorgensen has been working very hard to try to deal with that, but I think there's still funding issues there too that are that need to be prioritized. So it would be good to really understand those things for the next meeting, because if the council has an appetite to rejigger the way we pay for things, i.e. eliminating the road tax, eliminating the fire tax, and combining it into a more general tax with ties to inflation, which by the way, whether we rejigger it or whether we rejigger the existing two taxes to make them more sustainable, in other words, they're tied to the cost either of, like for the roads, I propose possibly tying it to the cost of oil, because that's a big component in what it costs to maintain our roads. Fire tax needs to be tied to, something that represents the cost of labor in the state of California, because that's our exposure there. So whether we look at making those two taxes sustainable and more realistic to what it actually costs the city to provide those two services, or we move them into a single, general tax that addresses those two things. I think those are things that the public should definitely provide input in, and I think, unfortunately, we're going to run out of time for the November election unless we bite that bullet sooner rather than later. So, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, John. Carol, you had some items?
Yeah, the first thing I wanted to say is I really feel that the city residents get a wonderful return on their money from our staff. Brian always says, don't say we're not perfect, and I won't say they're perfect, but they really do a good job and go beyond what you could possibly expect. If there's a disaster, the rains, the staff has just been wonderful. And Angie and Rafferty and everyone else, as far as I know, works really hard, and I want to thank them and hope the community appreciates how hard they work. And another thing is I've been a lifelong resident almost of the city. I left in the middle for a long time, but our city, compared to a lot of cities, is in pretty good shape right now. But I was on the council in the late 90s, and I see the expenses that we face now are different. At that point, we had no paramedics at all, and I can't give you the exact figure, but it's costing us 300-some thousand a year now. So that paramedic expense is a huge expense. We have insurance with the Joint Powers Insurance Agency, and just like your homeowners, that goes up every year. Inflation has raised the costs. I didn't see any reference, we have attorneys' fees that actually they've become very reasonable. Fire engine, when I was on the council before, I think we bought a fire engine for $200,000 or $300,000, and now they're $1 million. So I think the residents need to consider, it's just common sense that we're going to have a problem if we don't figure out how to pay for all these built-in increases. As Rafferty mentioned, the state mandates, they just have changed the law on the Brown Act, and now they expect cities, I can't rattle off everything, but you have to translate your agendas into different languages, and the state keeps adding burdens that also drive up our costs. On the other side, as Rafferty touched upon, we're losing fuel revenue. We did get ARPA money, the COVA money from the federal government, but that's all gone. The fire tax, okay, so in other words, we're losing revenue that we have, and Greg gave an excellent analysis of how the property tax doesn't go up enough to cover all these other increases. I'm a little nervous on dealing with the fire tax. As I understand it, we have a fire tax that was enacted when the city was founded or back at that time, and that doesn't have to be revoted or passed consistently. So I don't know if we want to do anything with that, because that's in the books and it just goes up. It's got an inflation factor, and we don't have to have an election reinstating it as far as I'm concerned. So I would hate to see that disappear. The road tax, as everybody kind of knows, the current amount of the road tax was put in way lower than it should have been because there was a fear that it wouldn't pass because a prior attempt at a road tax had not passed. So the road tax for the several past years is way underfunded. So my thoughts are, I do think we need to deal with getting more revenue, but I would be very reluctant to get rid of this old pre-existing fire assessment, or maybe, I think we were told by the attorney that we could keep that one and then add or address other issues. Now, whether we just seek to pass another road tax, which is going to expire. The road tax will expire if we don't do something. So I think we need to look carefully at our options, but my bottom line is just life in general has become more expensive, and in order to keep our city in the good shape that I think it's in at this moment in time, we're going to have to look to the residents to help out.
Thank you. Norm, do you have any comments?
Yes, John stole a lot of my thunder, but that's good. That's actually, no, don't apologize. That's actually good news for me. So, in essence, the idea of a volunteer coordinator is absolutely a very good idea. I appreciate you proposing that. And just as a matter of historical recollection, in the good old days, we actually had volunteers working at City Hall. I forget her name right now, but she worked at the desk for a number of years, for example, one individual. And sometime in the, mid to late 2000s, we eliminated those positions and went to all professional staff. I won't go into the reasons why that was done, but in essence, we have a tremendous number of highly qualified people live in La Habra Heights. A classic example is Margarita McCoy, who served many years on our planning commission, also served on GPAC to help write our general plan. And she has had a national reputation in urban and regional planning. She received every award her professional organization had to offer, and they ran out of awards to give her, so they created a new one called the Margarita McCoy Award to give to other people. And that's just an example of some of the highly qualified people we have living in La Habra Heights. And as John Dominguez recommended, we ought to find ways of making use of their abilities, especially if they're willing to volunteer their time for us. And not to supersede or overcome what staff was doing, but essentially to help supplement and help staff do some of the work. So I absolutely agree with that. The other item is I haven't quite made up my mind, but I tend at this point to agree with Carol on the fire department as being a special tax different from all the other taxes. If I had to vote on it today, I'd be inclined to say we ought to have a fire tax in one category and all the other taxes in another, because our fire tax is an absolute necessity. And if worse comes to worse, I could see why somebody would vote yes on the fire tax, but conceivably no on the road tax, on the idea, well, we can kick that can down the road a little ways. We shouldn't do that, mind you. I'm not recommending that. But we can't lose our fire department. That's very, very important. Again, I'm open to all sorts of new and original ideas I haven't thought of before, simply because we need to look at all alternatives. Plus, a lot of times when we have conflicting ideas, I may not agree with either of them, but the fact that they're conflicting may stimulate new thought. So I appreciate greatly the input from our residents on this subject, especially on the need to, the idea we have 14 people on the volunteer list and nobody's responded to it. That's the fault of the city council, basically. We should have followed up on that earlier. And I thank John and Kathy for their input and for all the other residents over the various study sessions we've had on these subjects. And I have more to say, but I'll do everybody a favor and stop at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Norm. The one thing, I've been here a long time, been on the council for a long time, and it's, we hear everybody laughing back there, but it's so, I've seen what's happened over the years, and it's, you've had a very conservative council over the years, and really they've watched their money very, very, very carefully. And I mean, I can go back, it happened before I got on the council, but we, acting as a team, we were really conservative. And that's the only reason we have the money that we have in the general fund right now, and that's emergency money. Over all those years, we've never done deficit budget. And how many cities can you look at over the years when they lost revenue during the pandemic and all those other things that they didn't run a deficit? And there's lots of cities out there that are in financial bad shape right now, in trouble, and they added a bunch of staff, probably too many for what they had, and then they're forced with laying those people off, and a very painful situation. We've never put ourselves in that situation. And the one thing we didn't talk about was the oil revenue. And we did, over the past years, we've received quite a bit of money from oil revenue, and the fire department gets revenue from doing the inspections and all of that. And the state, I don't know if everybody has followed it or not, they did some re-drilling up here, and we approved that re-drilling, and we had negotiated a higher tax on oil for re-drills. Well, the state came in and essentially shut all that down. That if you're within so many feet of what they call a receptor, so housing and things like that. So they haven't been able to do any re-drills, plus the price of the oil now has dropped considerably, so that's a double whammy. So the oil revenue that we received in the past, looking forward, we can't be dependent upon any of that income stream. And maybe 10, 15 years ago, we looked at that and thought, well, that's going to help us out. And it did for a short period of time. And they did some re-drills, and they got some extra oil, and we got a certain amount of revenue. But all that stuff is going away. So we have to plan for the future. And with that, nobody likes to pay more taxes. Believe me, I'm very conservative, and I do not want to pay more taxes. But I'm also a realist, and I look at the budget, I look at how many staff we have, how hard they work, what we're faced with, and I realize that really the only way to sustain our city is that we're going to have to have enough revenue to run it properly. And we did a lot of things with the fire department, so that was sustainable. We had a problem with the paramedics, and we added a revenue stream for the paramedics, because that was, we were down to almost, I hate to tell you, the paramedics were in really bad shape there, and I had to reach out to the county to backstop us for a period of time to get through that whole challenge. And we did that, and now the paramedics are back, and it's good shape and all those things. But we can't continue to operate that way, because we need to provide the fire department and the paramedics and all those services that the city requires to the residents. And realistically, I don't want to do it. I don't think anybody in the council wants to necessarily want to do it, but we're going to have to pay a little bit more. And we're going to have to float a tax out there and get approval for it. And that's what we're going to have to do. John mentioned that we need to get going on it pretty soon, and that's we're just being realists about the whole thing and trying to look for the future. We want to save our city. We want to keep this in perpetuity and not have to go back to the county or something and lose all our cityhood and all the work that we've done. So with that, I guess at our next meeting, we'll be discussing more about how to do it and numbers and what to put on the numbers and how we want to do the taxing and tax rate and carving out the fire tax, I guess, because Carol mentioned that is we already have it in place, and we certainly don't want to lose that revenue stream. If we lost that revenue stream, it'd be total devastation. So we have to definitely keep that and convince the citizens that we want to keep this city and we want to operate, and we need to probably pay a little bit more to do it. Greg, you got a comment there?
I appreciate Carol's comments and yours as well. The way I was sort of formulating it, I thought that we would, when both of the two assessments were assessed in kind of an unusual fashion, they required a 2/3 vote of the population to pass them. That's because they had specific designators. There was a specific function. we're advised by council that a general tax that is undirected towards a specific function but can cover anything that the city feels is necessary to be covered only requires a 50% vote of the population. So it might be cumbersome. I had originally thought that it would be cumbersome to keep the 2 assessment districts running and sunset the districts and create one new general tax that wrapped all of that expense into an ongoing thing. Because, for example, the cost elevators in the fire assessment don't come anywhere close to keeping us anywhere close to being in the cost of inflation. And there is none in the street assessments. That's one of the reasons we're in such trouble today. We didn't build in an annual increase in the assessment in order to combat inflation. So to me, that's how I was looking at it. But really, this is a matter for council to advise us on. I mean, Todd can certainly propose how to do this the best and most efficient way. I don't want to lose any revenue. We can't afford to lose a revenue stream. I don't intend to lose them. I was just thinking it might be operationally easy for us as a city to sunset the 2 existing assessment districts and create a new general tax. But again, that's council's advised us that that's doable, but we would probably, maybe the next step for our purposes before we meet in February is to ask Todd to, Todd being our city attorney, ask Todd to give us an outline of how he thinks it might be best handled.
Does anybody else have anything to talk about? Okay, with that, I just recently learned that Stan Quaid's wife, Elaine, passed away. And Stan, he made the podium right there in front of us. And he's lived up here for probably 50 years. He's been here a long time resident. Lives north of the park over there. So if you happen to see Stan out there, or you know, give him a card or a hug or whatever you say. He's a long-term resident that's done a lot for our city. So with that, I'll adjourn in his name. Thank you.